Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar, the third in the series of four UK international webinars helping universities to prepare for the end of the transition period. This webinar is going to focus on Horizon Europe, the EU Research and Innovation Framework Programme, and we're going to take a look at what we currently know about the UK domestic alternatives to that programme and consider the prospects for association and think a bit about how universities can prepare for whatever faces us in the coming weeks and months. So here's a list of what I'm going to cover. As I say, we'll start with the end of the transition period and just go over some of the facts about what that means and how universities will be affected. Then we'll look more specifically at what that means for participation by UK researchers in Horizon Europe. We'll consider a bit the different scenarios that we could be facing come the start of 2021. We'll then look at what we know at the moment, again, about the UK domestic alternatives, and we'll give some UK international perspectives on what the domestic alternative should look like. And just to end, we'll provide a few additional ideas of things that we're proposing that government could look at to support international collaboration in universities beyond the domestic alternatives. And then finally, some pieces of advice for how universities can prepare. But before I start, I'm just going to give a few caveats. Firstly, I want to make clear that what we're doing here in this webinar is interpreting the official information that we have received from the UK government and the rules that the EU sets for participation in its framework programmes, and then adding on top of that a few perspectives of our own on what we think government should do. And I will make as clear as possible when I'm doing one or the other. The goal is to explain everything that we can explain clearly about the current circumstances. But I think we do have to acknowledge, and I want to stress at the start, that there is obviously still substantial uncertainty, not least because of where we stand in the negotiation process, but also about what we know about the Horizon Europe programme. So there are a lot of questions that we still can't answer. Having said that, there is time at the end for you to ask questions, and you can submit these via the Q&A tab, which you should have on the webinar interface. The slides, excuse me, the slides should be downloadable via the link also in the slide, and the webinar itself will be available on YouTube, and we'll send that out at the start of next week. I'll go over this at the end as well, but feel free to write to me, and you've got my email address there with any further questions or comments that come to you later on. And just a reminder that for UK institutions who are joining us, who subscribe to UCRO, that obviously UCRO is a very important source of authoritative information on UK participation in Horizon Europe. And I'd encourage you to get in touch with your European advisor if you have any particular technical questions about UK participation. So before we actually start with the presentation itself, I thought we'd do a short icebreaker. So if I could ask you all to either using a new window in your browser or a different device, if you go to menti.com and then enter the code that you can see there on the screen, or if you could scan the QR code on that page, then you should open up a window with some questions about what time you went to bed last night. So I'll give you a few more seconds to open that up, and then I'll change over to that screen. Okay, right, so let's see if that works. So hopefully, and the instructions for joining are still at the top of this page, so we should be able to get a result, an idea. I can see there's 57 people in there, so that seems to have worked pretty well. You should all have had a question there asking you what time you stayed up till last night watching the results. Well, not that we have results yet, but watching the coverage. So if you all could answer that question, just to check if this is working, I'm going to start a little countdown here. Not a minute. I'm going to give you less than that. I'll give you 10 seconds. And voting has closed. So let's see how long everyone was up for. I see the majority of people went to bed as normal. Very good. Me too. I'm very impressed at the 6 of you who clearly are night owls. You have my complete respect. So moving on, I thought it'd be useful to get an idea of where everyone is located. By the way, this question should have, if you either refresh on the button where it says refresh, or if you this may happen automatically for some of you. You should have another question asking where you are joining the webinar from. Just thought it'd be good to get an idea of the spread of people in the joining us today. And for anyone who's joining us late, there are instructions for how to join this at the top of the page there. So you go to menti.com and add in that code. So I'll give you all another countdown to answer this question, 10 seconds. I'm imagining the majority are going to be UK based, but we did have a few sign-ups from European friends, so it'll be interesting to see what the spread is. So voting is closed. Let's see where everyone's from. Yeah, and okay, indeed, I see the dots are fighting there within the UK. So we have about yeah, pretty large majority from the UK and 20 or so from Europe. So welcome and glad you could join us. So moving on, just 2 more questions now. The third, I thought it'd be useful to get an idea of pre-existing levels of knowledge about UK domestic alternatives to Horizon Europe. I'll be really interested to see the answer to this. So as you see, you've got four options here, going from nothing at all, a little, a fair bit, to fully up to speed. I'll be very impressed if anyone is fully up to speed, because I'm not even sure if I would call myself that so far. So anyone who does click that, I might just ask if you want to take over from me on the presentation. So again, I'll give you another 10-second countdown here. Nearly there. And so let's see. So it's a pretty good spread between nothing at all, a little, and a fair bit, and 3 very impressive individuals who are fully up to speed. And I'd be very interested to know where you work. And then one last question, just as a bit of a temperature check, to see how we're all feeling about the circumstances, about prospects for association, and about your level of preparedness for Horizon Europe. I've asked, put 3 different statements down here. If you can just use the slider to indicate, to what extent you disagree or agree with these 3 statements. So they are: my institution is already preparing to participate in Horizon Europe. I believe the UK will become an associated country in Horizon Europe, and I am confident that UK-EU collaboration will continue to grow even if the UK does not associate to Horizon Europe. So I'll give you a bit longer for that one, just because it's 3 questions there. I thought it'd be interesting just to get a sense of the mood, seeing as we've got so many people who are interested in UK-EU research collaboration gathered in one place this afternoon, including a number of European partners. So very intrigued to see how this one's going to go. And there we go. So let's have a look at those results. So it's all pretty middle ground, I see. But people are most confident, it seems. If you can say 3 out of 5 is a high degree of confidence about association. And then it's, again, middling when it comes to preparing for the next programme, and confidence in the growth in UK-EU collaboration, even if we don't associate. So hopefully whatever I'm going to present to you today will hopefully give you some more encouragement about all of these factors, or at least that's the aim. So if I just go back to the slides here. So thank you for indulging me with that little icebreaker. I'm going to get into the meat of the presentation now. So let's start with the end of the transition period and what this means. So I'm sure you're all aware that at the moment we find ourselves in this kind of standstill transition period following the UK's official withdrawal from the EU at the start of the year, which will end at the end of 2020 on 31st of December, as well at the same time as the current EU financial framework ends and all of the existing EU programmes. I'm sure you're also aware that the UK and the EU is negotiating a future partnership or trade deal at the moment. But the first thing to note is that that trade deal in itself, if it is agreed, does not in itself guarantee UK association to Horizon Europe. And I will come back to this point a little bit later on, detailing some of the steps hoops that need to be jumped through. However, it does mean that as of the 1st of January, the UK will exit the regulatory regimes such as the General Data Protection Regulation and the Chemicals Regulation that are obviously very important for UK research activity and also for collaborations. So that's something which I would encourage you all to be paying attention to as we work up to the end of this year. I'm not going to focus on those individual regulatory issues in this presentation, but if you have detailed questions about them, then please do get in touch with me afterwards, and I'd be happy to try and chase those up. Of course, this also means that a new immigration system will be coming into force. I'm not going to say anything more about that either, because we had a webinar yesterday from my colleague Harry Anderson that talked about that. That will also be available on YouTube in the near future for anyone who wants to learn more about what we know about that at the moment. But the most important thing to note here, I think, is to flag that, as has been clear for a good year or so now, nothing is going to change with respect to existing Horizon 2020 projects and applications that are submitted before the end of the transition period, because the UK applicants and participants will continue to be treated as full participants, retaining the eligibility status that they've had so far in the framework programme. So that's one area where we don't have to worry. So what does that mean for the UK in the new Horizon Europe programme? So it looks extremely likely now that the UK will start Horizon Europe, the successor to Horizon 2020, as a third programme, third country. This means that UK research entities will not be eligible for single beneficiary calls. So this is the grants from the European Research Council, most of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, and the European Innovation Council. But at the same time, it's important to emphasise that third country participation is still open for collaborative projects, or at least, as I've put there with some asterisks, probably open in most collaborative projects. And the reason for those caveats is just to flag that the Horizon Europe legal text is still being negotiated for by the EU institutions. So we can't say with 100% certainty that nothing will change, but I would be quite surprised if there were substantial changes to third country participation, except to flag that there are discussions ongoing about the extent to which they can be involved in projects relating to security and defence issues. However, the really kind of more optimistic thing to flag here is that the UK government has publicly stated, as I'll talk about a bit more, that it would like to secure full associated country status in Horizon Europe, meaning that we don't have to worry about, that we wouldn't have to worry at least about third country participation, and that the UK and UK researchers would contribute to the full budget in return for full eligibility, as I say, we hope. But clearly that hasn't happened yet. So what's holding this up? Other than fisheries and the level playing field in the top level future partnership negotiations. The main issue here relates to the financial contribution that the UK is going to have to make in return for associated country status. We know that there are intense negotiations going on around that, and that the current offer on the table from the EU would represent a very substantial increase in the amount of money that the UK would have to pay in for association. And indeed, in a way, the UK has never had to pay for participation in Horizon 2020 or in the previous framework programs, because of course this was just a result of its membership of the EU. So it's natural that this is going to be an issue that will require negotiation, because this is a whole new financial footing for UK participation in the EU framework programs. And I suppose the question that the government is asking itself here is, does this represent value for money for the taxpayer? So we're very clear that in terms of the UK perspective, that paying more into the programme should be expected, and we should be ready to do that. But at the same time, the current EU offer on the table, which involves a one-way correction mechanism whereby the UK may have to top up its contribution if it received more, but it wouldn't get a refund if it received less, does seem like quite a stretch at the moment. But this is still all under negotiation, so let's not jump to any conclusions. The other thing to note here, as I alluded to earlier, is that the actual trade deal itself would only open the door to UK participation in union programmes, and that there would have to be subsequent negotiations with the EU over the specific question of association to Horizon Europe. If agreement was found on association, that would become an annex to that top-level agreement, and thus the UK would become a full associated country. However, we should flag that these negotiations, the association negotiations, can only start once the legal texts for EU programmes, in this case Horizon Europe, are finalised by the EU institutions. And then negotiations themselves do normally take several months. And just to flag, this is an issue not just facing the UK, but also facing other countries that have routinely associated to the framework programme, such as Switzerland and Israel, and to a lesser extent, Norway, over a lesser extent in terms of the difficulty of the negotiation, I think. But yes, just to flag that we're not the only ones in this boat. So we still might not know where we stand definitively on the 1st of January. We will have a clearer idea of what the likely outcomes are, but we should be clear that it's extremely unlikely, and indeed probably impossible, that we will know whether the UK will be associated to Horizon Europe by the start of the year, but we will know more. So here I've laid out what we would call the two most feasible outcome or feasible scenarios that we could be facing on the 1st of January. There are many more ways in which this could be cut. So this is, I should stress, something of a simplification, but I think this summarises pretty well the kind of dichotomy that we're potentially faced with. So the first is that a trade deal is agreed, and that Horizon Europe association negotiations can begin. So once the Horizon Europe text is finalised, and the trade deal is agreed, then EU and UK negotiators would then have subsequent negotiations around Horizon Europe. In the best case scenario, this takes a few months, and actually in the meantime the Commission can, if it's minded to do so, grant the UK kind of an interim eligibility to apply for Horizon grants, Horizon calls, as an associated country, even before those negotiations are completed. Domestic alternatives, which I'll get onto in a moment, would still be needed in this case, but for the short term, and would be predicated on the assumption that the UK would secure full association in time for the close of the first calls. So it would really just be smoothing that gap rather than providing a comprehensive replacement. Less optimistically, if there's no trade deal and UK-EU relations look to be at a low ebb, then it will probably look less likely that those association negotiations will commence in the near future. which would in turn most probably mean that the UK would remain a third country in Horizon Europe for an extended period. And depending on how, as I say, UK-EU relations look following the collapse of those talks. But a silver lining to that cloud here being that, as we talked about earlier on, third country participation is still possible even in this circumstance. We'd lose the option to participate in the single beneficiary calls, but for the majority of those collaborative calls, the UK could still participate. So this would mean that we would need a more domestic alternatives with a more comprehensive long-term outlook, especially where single beneficiary funding is concerned. And in this case, actually, to be fair, just as it would be in the more optimistic case, funding for third country participation to give not just the EU but the UK research communities confidence that there will be money available to fund those collaborations. That funding, that guarantee, will be vital. And we would also suggest that the government should be looking at other short-term alternatives. So I've already started talking about this term, domestic alternatives, but what does this mean? So the government has already committed to taking steps to address the shortfall or any shortfall in funding or collaboration opportunities that arises from the end of the transition period and the uncertainty over the UK eligibility status in the Horizon Europe programme. And these steps are what we're referring to when we talk about domestic alternatives. Just to be clear, in the way that UKI is talking about them, I think we're not trying to claim that this is obviously a direct like-for-like replacement for participation in Horizon Europe. I think we're clear that there is no substitute for full association. This was really by far and away the best outcome for universities and for the UK research base. But as we've already talked about, there are clearly some obstacles to that. So it's only right that the government is looking at what contingencies could be needed if that negotiation process doesn't end happily. So the main document that I'm going to be referring to here is one that a lot of you have already seen, which is the UK R&D roadmap that was published in the summer, which gave us our first kind of glimpse at what domestic alternatives could mean, or what the government is thinking about when it's talking about domestic alternatives. So this would include a new discovery fund, funding for third country participation, budget uplifts for existing schemes, and also, importantly, it doesn't actually say that anything else is excluded. Now, that is not the end of the presentation on domestic alternatives, don't worry, I will explain exactly what we're talking about with all of those different elements. But first, I'm going to talk briefly about the difference that we see in that document when we're talking about the two different scenarios, essentially, that I referred to before. So starting with that best case scenario, where there is a successful conclusion to the trade deal negotiations and we are beginning association negotiations, the roadmap says this, and I'm going to just read this out because I think this is quite important. If there were any gap before we became formally associated, we would implement short-term alternative funding arrangements through proven, attractive UK schemes. During any gap, we would provide funding to UK partners who are successful in bidding to programmes open to third country participation. So in practice, this would mean that UK researchers could start applying to Horizon Europe calls for those collaborative projects to which it was eligible, safe in the knowledge that even if the association negotiations would collapse, the government would have committed to funding that participation as a third country. As I said before as well, strengthening this scenario is the possibility that the Commission could at a certain point then grant this kind of interim eligibility that we've seen happen with other states in the past as they've been negotiating their own association agreements. I should point out this isn't a guarantee, it's entirely at the Commission's discretion to do that, but we would hope that if it was trending in a positive direction, that this would be considered. And then also in the meantime, I think to reassure the sector and universities, as we see in that paragraph there, the government is also committing to uplifting domestic funding schemes, as I say, just to kind of smooth over that gap between the end of the transition period and association. And as I say there, that's in line also with its commitment to increase public spending in R&D. So what if we don't associate, or if it looks like we're not going to associate for the time being? This is a longer paragraph, but again, please forgive me if I'm just going to read this out. If we do not associate to Horizon Europe or Euratom, the Euratom research and training programme, we will implement ambitious alternatives as quickly as possible from January 2021 and address the funding gap. As a first step, we will launch an ambitious new discovery fund, offering sizable grants over long periods of time to talented early, mid and late career researchers, whether already in the UK or coming here from anywhere in the world, to pursue discovery-led, groundbreaking research. We will also scale up and enhance our most prestigious domestic funding schemes, providing funding to allow UK researchers and innovators to seize opportunities and to allow our institutions to attract and retain international talent. We will make funding available to allow UK partners to participate in European schemes open to third countries. So that's a lot of words. So I'm going to try and unpack some of that. Firstly, what on earth is a discovery fund? So we can only comment on this based on what we know from that text, but it seems quite clear that the discovery fund would seek to replace access to those single beneficiary funds that the UK currently benefits from through the European Research Council and parts of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, which aren't open to third country participation for UK-based researchers, or I should add, researchers who wish to become UK-based. So as I say, that's all we really know at the moment is what's in that paragraph. But we've been thinking about this possibility for a while, and that is the UKI has been thinking about this for a while, and we have a number of calls that we've been feeding into to government on what that should look like. The first of these is the question of funding. Obviously, the UK is a very successful applicant to the ERC and Marie Curie actions, so there will need to be a good level of resource to ensure that any discovery fund has the adequate level of resource to attract the same volume of researchers. And this doesn't take into account, obviously, the cost of setting the whole thing up. So we've got some figures there that are based on UK participation in Horizon 2020, and as you can see, it's not an insubstantial amount of money, and that's just for the first year of the programme. In terms of the actual running of the scheme, we think it should mirror the characteristics of the ERC as closely as possible, at least to begin with, and most importantly, this has to include independent scientific oversight comprising eminent researchers from across the world who would have that responsibility ultimate responsibility for funding decisions. This is really important for guaranteeing this idea of a programme which is led purely by scientific excellence, rather than calls that researchers need to think about UK political priorities or industrial policy priorities, and something which is genuinely blue skies. And then finally, in terms of what it funds, obviously it needs to retain that focus on blue sky fundamental research across and between disciplines without any disciplinary limits, and also very importantly needs a kind of unique identity and branding that sets it apart from existing UK grant schemes. I think we're quite clear this has to be something special which can catch the eye of international researchers and UK-based researchers, for retention purposes as well. So as I say, these are just a few ideas of ours about what a discovery fund should look like. But at the moment, we can't say any more about what the government is actually planning. I would also stress that there needs to be a clear separate and bespoke plan for replacing the Marie Skłodowska-Curie funding for research and mobility, in addition to that replacement for the ERC. And also, just to flag before I move on, this is actually not a this idea is familiar in other European research systems that already participate in Horizon 2020. Several other European systems run similar excellence-driven blue sky grant schemes. So a question that we would ask government as well is why not consider doing this in addition to association and not just instead of? So anyway, that's just a few thoughts on the Discovery Fund and what that could mean. So moving on to the question of third country participation, you'll have noticed that in those two scenarios that the guarantee around third country participation. Sorry, excuse me one moment while I just try and clear this error message which I'm getting up. Okay, so if we, in the scenario where we don't associate, the last line here says that we will make funding available to allow UK partners to participate in European schemes open to third countries. And as you can see there, that's a slightly less kind of comprehensive guarantee than we see in the first, the best case scenario. So what we're saying, what UKI is saying about this unequivocally, is that this commitment needs to be to meet the same three tests in either case. So firstly, it needs to cover all Horizon Europe calls, or at least as many as possible, given any potential limits on third country participation. That would mean the budget would need to be large enough to cover all calls without any risk of it being exhausted. And I think this is important because not doing this risks putting off researchers both in the UK and in the EU with just another layer of doubt and uncertainty over whether their particular area would be covered or not. The second of these key tests is the urgency, and the fact that this needs to be announced really as quickly as possible to have the maximum impact. This is because we already have draft work programs. I'm sure many of the people here listening to this webinar have seen draft work programs. So obviously, as you'll be aware, researchers are already thinking about funding bids, particularly in countries where there is no uncertainty over their participation in the program. And so the sooner UK researchers can start to enter into those discussions with their peers across the EU about being part of those bids, then the higher the likelihood of success, of successful UK participation in them. And I'd also flag there that actually we're aware that Switzerland has actually already done exactly this, has said that even though they will have to go through the same process as us when it comes to negotiating association, they've made this guarantee, and which gives their researchers the ability to go to their partners and say, look, even if we don't know about association, our government has said they will fund third country participation. And finally, another thing, the third of these tests is that there should be no strings attached, which is to say, it's really key there's no additional evaluation or any kind of further hoops that UK researchers would have to jump through in order to qualify for that funding, because obviously the idea of any kind of double jeopardy would be a big disincentive to including UK researchers in those applications. So as I say, those are three things that we're asking for, whether we associate or not, because we think obviously these collaborative bids, even if it's a smaller degree of funding at some institutions than ERC and Marie Curie funding, it's a much greater volume of collaboration. So whether or not we associate Horizon Europe, the UK government needs to be doing everything that it can to ensure that UK researchers can play the fullest possible role in those collaborative bids, because this is something that we know just simply can't be replaced. Over time, we would argue that there should be an increase, as I'll talk about in a moment, in the number of joint calls that UKRI is engaging with, but clearly it's just not possible that this diversity and volume of calls can be replaced by the UK in the short term, or even, to be honest, in the long term. So you'll have noted as well that the roadmap refers to other alternatives as well to uplifting budgets for existing UK grant schemes. The key thing to point out here is that we still don't know which ones or by how much, and that's information that we're still waiting for from the UK government. Obviously, any commitment to increase domestic funding schemes is welcome, and as I said before, this is in line with the government's existing commitment to increase public funding, public investment in research and development. But we would flag there are obviously limits to how effectively these existing scheme uplifts can replace Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe participation, because it's important to note that these schemes occupy a fundamentally different position in the funding landscape to EU funding, and therefore kind of an over-reliance on budget uplifts or increasing to replace that EU funding could generate some quite substantial changes in the spread of funding, of research funding across institutions, across regions, and across different disciplines. So I think while we welcome any attempt to plug this funding shortfall through existing schemes, I think we are aware that this doesn't come without its risks. I would also note that, as I said right at the start, the roadmap doesn't rule out any other announcements. So I think, again, we're just going to have to wait and see when the government comes forward with more information, what else might come out. A final point here, that alongside these kind of specific alternatives to Horizon, UKI is very clear. We hear loudly and clearly from our members how important ODA research schemes such as GCRF and Newton have been in recent years in supporting the increase in international collaboration in research and in innovation at UK universities. So alongside all of these other kind of EU targeted alternatives, I think it's really important not to lose sight of those schemes and their importance. So obviously we're calling for those to be renewed in the spending review. So we've talked a bit about the transition period and domestic alternatives, but what else could the UK government do to support international collaboration? UK International has actually recently published a report on exactly this topic. It's called our Future International Partnerships report, and you can see the front cover there. The link, I think, is available in the slides, and if not, we'll send that by email afterwards. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I thought it'd be useful just to point to this piece of work, just to show that I think it's important not to look at the future of international collaboration as being purely and exclusively wrapped up in the question of association and Horizon alternatives, and that there are lots of other things which government could be thinking about to enhance international collaboration at UK universities. A few of the ideas that we talk about in the report are expanding the use of the international co-investigator option in UKRI grant calls. So this enables PIs to allocate a certain amount of their budget to an international co-investigator to cover their direct costs, and that can be used with collaboration partners anywhere in the world, and doesn't rely on having some kind of joint call or common pot. We're encouraging UKRI to develop new international funding agreements, both bilaterally and also multilaterally, through various different means, but especially the joint calls and lead agency agreements. We think there's significant opportunities to incentivize new investment by international businesses in collaborative projects with UK universities. And we also propose some other ways for strengthening institution level partnerships, both through networking and also through dedicated funding for research and mobility. So moving to the end now, I'm just going to go through a few kind of hints and tips and advice for what we've heard from members could be useful preparation for the uncertainty that we're facing. So obviously, top of the list is to look out for further announcements from the UK government and UKRI on domestic alternatives and what those will mean in practice. In this presentation, obviously, we've tried to explain as much as we do know and set out the questions that we still have. So clearly now it's a question of waiting to see what further information comes out. And as soon as there is more information, ourselves, UCRO, the Science and Innovation Network, and a multitude of other UK research and innovation sector organisations will, of course, share this information as widely as possible, both within the UK and with European partners. The second thing I've written here is not to lose hope about the prospects for association. I think we saw at the start in the icebreaker, I think it was there was about a 60% kind of average, 3 out of 5 when it comes to the confidence in securing association. And to be fair, I think that's probably more or less about where I put it, maybe a little bit higher. But I think it's genuinely still all to play for, and there is a very strong understanding on the UK and the EU side of the common benefit, the mutual interest in securing this relationship in science and innovation. And I think there is still every chance that we'll get a deal, even though this is clearly now being negotiated at a very high political level, even if there is, as a result, a small gap between the end of the transition period and the conclusion of an association agreement. Thirdly, we would say that although we understand that obviously capacity is stretched at the moment for very understandable reasons, it's really, if you have the time and if you can find time to do this, then familiarise yourself with the new programme. Take a look at the draft work programmes that are coming up, which I know that UCRO can help with, and start talking to your researchers about potential collaboration opportunities through those programmes, or talk to them about the possibility of potential ERC or Marie Curie applications. I think also importantly there, it's important to note there are changes in the new programme that will change the way in which you researchers will participate in Horizon Europe. So you have a look at the detail around how things like the new Pillar 2 and missions and clusters are working. Obviously, it's going to be really important to keep European partners informed, both those who researchers already work with and potential future collaboration partners. So we'd encourage you to share what information is available with them, and even if you feel it's appropriate, with all of the funny gifts this presentation. And to the European friends who are listening to this presentation now, the 22 of you, I think, who were participating at least in the Mentimeter, please do spread this information across your kind of research communities, and the message that UK researchers and universities are continue to be open for collaboration, through 2021 and beyond, hopefully through Horizon Europe. But even in the worst case scenario, I think the key message we'd like to reinforce at this point is that as a sector and as an organisation, as UKI, we're very committed to looking for all possible ways to continue to maintain and strengthen European collaborations, even if we don't end up with an association agreement. Although obviously we very much hope that we do. So that's the end of the presentation now. You're very welcome to submit questions via the tab on the GoToWebinar panel there. and I'll answer as many as I can now in the next 15 minutes or so. And any that I don't get round to, I will respond to hopefully in the next week. If you have any kind of longer thoughts or reflections or comments, then again, my email address is there. So feel free to write to me offline and I'll get back to you there. If you're a UK international member, then please do write to that email address there if you'd like to join any of our regional networks, and you can see the list via the link there. This includes our Europe network. And finally, to UKI members and anyone else, obviously, please do follow UUK International via social media to stay in touch with these latest developments, because yeah, any information that we do learn about domestic alternatives will be shared via those channels. So if you bear with me for a moment, I'm just going to have a look in the chat window to see if we are getting any questions. And take a sip of water. So I think the first question I can see here is, do we have an idea of when the government will launch more details on the Discovery Fund? I'm afraid the answer to that is no, but what I can say is that we are urging them to do this as quickly as possible, because we understand how important it is for the UK research base, excuse me, how important it is for the for UK researchers and also prospective international researchers who might want to apply for this fund to have the information available on what those calls will look like, particularly because we know that there are ERC calls that will be opening in the first few months of next year, and there is obviously the option to apply for those calls from outside of the EU. So I'm afraid the answer is no, we don't know at the moment, but all I can say is that we are stressing how important this is, and I think that government does understand that in the conversations that we're having with officials. I think there's a clear understanding of the time imperative here. So I'm going to take another sip of water. So another question here about the Discovery Fund. Can non-UK citizens be part of this scheme if they studied in the UK? So again, we don't know the details of how the Discovery Fund will operate. So it's impossible to give a definitive answer to that question. But I can only assume, I mean, if we're going by what we would be calling for, the key point here is around geographical openness. So we would say that any researcher, whether they're based in the UK or outside, should be able to apply for this scheme and have their application evaluated on its merits and on the basis of its scientific excellence, irrespective of where they are at the moment or where or what they studied. But as I say, again, I'm sorry, but in terms of a definitive answer there, it's not possible to say at the moment, but that is certainly what we'd be calling for. So one other question coming through here. Do you know if future announcements on alternatives funds will happen after spending review announcements? And when is the spending review statement due? So the latter, I don't know if we have a date yet, but I know it's been, government is now saying the end of November. It may well be that we're waiting for spending review for clarity on these announcements, but then at the same time, we now know that spending review is only going to be a 1-year review, a very unusual type of spending review. So actually, this is a difficulty here because Horizon is a multi-year program. So we're kind of saying to government and to UKRI, stressing the importance of a kind of multi-year clarity. And I think for example, if there was a funding guarantee that was only for 1 year, that would not be particularly useful. In terms of whether that's dependent or not on the spending review, clearly I think there's obviously going to be a a link there. But again, I can't say for sure whether that is something that would only happen after the spending review, or whether there could be a possibility that announcements could come before then. And as I said, as I repeat, we're stressing very regularly to BEIS and to UKRI how urgent those announcements are. So then there's a question here: have the EU decided that associated countries cannot participate in the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions and the ERC? I suspect this is alluding to some of the press coverage in recent weeks about some of the uncertainty over this in light of the text that the Council agreed, which is currently being discussed in trialogue between the Council, the Parliament and the Commission on Horizon Europe, which included this infamous Article 12, which introduces the possibility essentially of partial association by let me get this right, by non-member states who fall into this category D, which is basically non-EEA countries such as the UK, but also such as Switzerland and Israel. So no, they haven't decided that associated countries can't participate in the ERC and the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, but we should say that article would allow them to do that if they wanted to. We've spoken to EU stakeholders about this, and the message we hear back from them is that this is very much something which is geared towards prospective associated countries who are further afield, such as Canada or Japan or Australia, who they wouldn't want to involve in those single beneficiary programs. And indeed, we'd say that the UK and Switzerland and Israel, for that matter, have been successful, have kind of contributed to the strength of these programs over the past 10 years and beyond for Marie Curie. And so there's really no reason to kind of exclude us at this point. So I wouldn't say, in answer to the question, no, I don't think they have decided that associated countries can't participate in Marie Curie and ERC, and that's not the message that we're hearing. But as I said in the slides at the start, that those trilogue discussions are still ongoing. So to give a 100% definitive answer, we'll have to wait for that process to be completed. But I certainly would hope that they're not going to exclude us. So another question here: can UK organisations still apply for funding in the January 2021 Green Deal calls, even if transition period has ended on the 31st of December? I'm going to check that. I don't want to give a definitive answer to that here and now. I do have a gut instinct, but I'm not going to share it because I don't want to spread any kind of misinformation. So if it's all right with whoever is asking that, I will get back to you on that particular question. Key question for me is, another question here is, so how can we reassure European partners? Yes, this is a very good question. So as kind of blithe as it might sound, as far as in my opinion, the best thing you can do is really just kind of maintain those conversations with European partners and keep them informed about what's going on, and just try and allay the worst concerns about how terrible the situation might become. As I've tried to set out here, I think there is reason for some measured optimism, and certainly association is still all to play for. At the same time, obviously, we're aware that you don't want to, we're not trying to mislead anyone here and suggest that anything that's unrealistic. But I don't think this is association isn't unrealistic outcome. So I suppose that the recommendation from me would be just to communicate with those partners, as I say, share the information that I've put across here, and just give them the reasons for optimism, I suppose, would be my my suggestion. I understand, obviously, that there is a degree of cynicism in some parts of the sector, and with reason. We've spoken to a lot of European counterpart agencies and associations over the past few years, and we understand that the challenges that you face in putting across that message. But I suppose all I can say is that the best thing to do is to just as I say, give the reasons for optimism and set it out alongside the facts as we have them at the moment. And of course, as soon as we do have further information, particularly around third country participation, to pass that on. So another question here, please clarify your point on being a difference in the roadmap in respect of third country participation in case we associate and versus. Right, so this question is about what is the difference in the roadmap relating to third country participation if we associate and if we don't. And I think what I'm going to do here is go back. Oh, I didn't animate the GIF, I'm sorry about that. Is to go back to the slide and just so once again read out the text. So so the commitment here is during any gap, so this is the best kind of, if we do associate, and if there is a gap, we would provide funding to UK partners who are successful in bidding to programmes open to third country participation. So as we read that is a comprehensive guarantee for UK researchers who successfully apply for funding, which is to say any call which is open to a UK researcher as a third country in the first instance would subsequently be funded if they were successful. So that is a more comprehensive wording, in my view, than what we see in the in case we don't associate, where it says funding, we will make funding available to allow our partners to participate in European schemes open to third countries. And I suppose that the question there is the difference between the wording, where we say we will make funding available, and it's explicit commitment to funding UK partners who are successful. I mean, this is just to be clear, our analysis here. We aren't privy to the discussions which Bays are having about this, but I think the key point is that there are those three tests that we lay out here. These are what we're asking for, and we're asking for these three things to be met, whether or not it's a question of association or non-association. Are Rutherford fellowships gone for good? I would have to check which fellowships which specific. I would have to check whether you're referring. Well, firstly, I'm not sure whether you're referring to the fund in general or a specific type of fellowship. But I think the best thing to do is maybe if you come back to us with that question, maybe in a bit more detail, and we'll try and follow up on that. And I don't think, but yeah, we'll do our best to answer that offline if that's okay. And I think maybe kind of coming to the 3 o'clock. So just one more question here. Do you know whether UK alternative calls? Sorry, I need to move the window. Do you know whether the UK alternative calls will be released through the standard research councils or through a new council under the UKRI umbrella? Also, is the UK going to fund Erasmus, KA2 and KA3 calls? So the second part of your question, I am going to hand over to my colleague Anna Mai, who is doing a presentation, a webinar tomorrow on Erasmus, specifically on Erasmus. I'm going to answer the first part of that question very quickly because we've only got 1 minute left. Will the calls be handled through through the standard research councils or through a new council? We don't know. We don't know what the UKRI hasn't shared any of this information with us. I'd be frankly quite surprised if we were suddenly going to wake up with a new research council on the 1st of January, but I can't give a definitive answer to that. All I would say is that as we were coming up to the end of the original Article 50 period last year, and we had the discussions over the third country participation guarantee for the remainder of Horizon 2020, we know that UKRI were looking at a way of managing at least the third country guarantee through existing UKRI infrastructure. And I would also state that, again, we don't know the detail of the Discovery Fund, but we're certainly calling for something which is, even if it uses in some way UKRI infrastructure, something which is clearly distinct and has a unique character from anything that UKRI is currently doing. So I think that's all we've got time for today. Any questions which have been submitted which I didn't have time to answer, I will endeavour to get around to in the next week. And as I said in the slide at the end there, please do contact me by email if you do have any further, more detailed questions. And other than that, I think I'd just like to thank you all for your time and attention. And yeah, I wish you all the best and that you continue to enjoy watching the US election coverage. Thank you very much.